So thanks again for everyone for joining us. This is Maggie from the Codementor team, and the session today is getting started as an open source software contributor / maintainer. As you probably noticed, we are using Zoom webinar for this event, so it is completely normal that you can't see the other attendees or that you cannot unmute your mic. But don't worry, please know that a lot of you are here with us. And on something that you should keep in mind is on the bottom of your Zoom webinar, there's a Q&A section box. So throughout the event, if you have any questions for Peter, please just directly input that in the Q&A box. We do have an Q&A section at the end of the event, and we'll try our best to get to as many of those questions as possible. And just as a brief reminder, please keep your languages and respectful and encouraging at all times so that we can all have a great time. There will also be a link to the code of conduct in the chat. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to check that out. And now I want to officially introduce our speaker, Peter. And he is a software product architect manager at Accenture and a thought leader in the open source software community. I believe he is the right person to talk to us today about open source software. And without further ado, Peter, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you and welcome. So my name is Peter Somogyvari. And basically, I have been working with open source software in one shape or another for about 8 to 9 years now. And this talk will be a collection of thoughts and tips and tricks that I picked up along the way. The table of contents, first I will talk a little bit about the definitions, a tiny little bit about etiquette, and then I'll get into the meat of it of becoming a contributor. And then after that, finally, I will close out by talking about becoming a maintainer. If you don't know what the difference is between a contributor and a maintainer, don't worry, that's something that I will cover in the definitions section. Before we get to those two, though, I also wanted to talk about the definition of InnerSource, which is, it refers specifically to the use of open source software inside organizations. And this is important because most of us have jobs. And so the way we interact with open source will always be relevant to the organization that we work for. And there's also opportunities to improve things within the organization through open source. The benefits of it can be network effect, as in if you start doing open source, maybe others will as well, you can increase your visibility within the organization. This can help your career, things like that. And then of course, it also helps if more people are looking at the same code. So if you have something in the organization that is security critical, and you share that with others within the organization, then there's a higher chance that bigger mistakes will be spotted. And then the reason why I mentioned this is because open source software recently have been making the news, as in recent years, for some very high profile vulnerabilities. Most recently, the supply chain attacks that you might have heard of. For example, when someone becomes a maintainer of a software project that millions of people are using, and then they end up committing a malicious piece of code into that and push it out as an update that then everyone else who uses that software unknowingly installs. So these kind of threats are growing by the day, and they are serious. And so it's my personal mission to try and bring corporations, companies to the table in terms of open source, and just spread the word that they should all try to be stewards of open source software and contribute as much as they can. And now finally, to the actual definitions of contributor. Is a person who helps improve the project, but does not have or does not want the authority to review pull requests. So here, the reason why I phrased it by saying helps improve, that part is important because we're not just talking about writing code. We're talking about writing documentation, testing the software. For example, you can be extremely helpful to your project without ever having written a single line of code if you always test the new releases and then you report problems, because that adds tremendous value to the maintainers or other contributors who will end up fixing those bugs. And then also to clarify, pull requests, just in case, those are proposed changes that you're making to a project. And the word or the expression pull request was popularized, as far as I know, by GitHub. And now on to maintainer. The maintainer is, they do everything that a contributor does, but then on top of that, there are additional responsibilities, most notably the actual reviews of changes proposed by everyone else who is working on the project. That includes contributors, but also other maintainers. It's if there are multiple maintainers in a project, then usually the way it works, or at least the way it should work, in my opinion, is that a committee of maintainers should always review each maintainer's changes as well. And then the other thing to highlight is that the maintainer tends to think about longer-term vision, goals of the project, so they kind of act as gatekeepers to prevent conceptual architectural problems sneaking in with changes that may seem small, but they're actually significant. They usually evangelize the project as well, meaning they're trying to spread the word. They're trying to develop the open source community around the project, trying to make sure that there's a steady flow of new contributors, because that's the only way you can make sure that on the long term, the project actually survives. And then there's more to it. You can organize, run, and manage the meeting calendar, the mailing list, the instant messaging platform. These tend to get overlooked by people, but someone has to do it, and it's usually the maintainers, even though it doesn't actually have that much to do with software development itself. And now on to etiquette, very quickly. Be mindful, which means that think about what you say and how you say it, treat people with respect, because version control is like the internet, it never forgets. And then these popular websites that I'm sure you have heard of, such as GitHub or GitLab, treat those as social media, because they are like social media. Anything that you post there is completely public and is linkable into the future forever. And then the other thing is reputation-wise, you have to be mindful, because if you have a profile on one of these sites and your profile states your employer, then people sometimes will assume that whatever it is that you are working on personally is actually something that your employer is working on. So these little things, these little boundaries, you have to pay attention to as well. The other big one is resiliency in the face of criticism. It means that sometimes the internet will have people on there who will not be very nice. And I recommend that regardless of the nature of the feedback or criticism that you receive, even if it's harsh or completely unhelpful, you just learn to shrug it off and stay humble, but also assertive, because in some situations, if you're discussing some software engineering concept with someone and you have differing opinions, you do have to make sure that you make your point. Just without being rude. And then the other thing is that asking for more information is always a good strategy to diffuse a potentially hostile conversation. And now let's talk about actually becoming a contributor, which would imply that you will propose a change to an open source software project, and that change will go through the entire life cycle of a change until it actually gets merged, which is the point where you can sort of start celebrating because the maintainers have approved your idea and they chose to include it in the actual source code of the project. So just to quickly kick it off, the life of a pull request. The way you usually start is that a need arises. Maybe you're working on something, you're writing some software, and there is a library that could help you with achieving whatever it is that you're trying to do, but it misses a feature or parts of a feature. Maybe it's not configurable enough, or it only supports A, B, and C, but not D. So at that point, you start looking into adding that feature yourself if there are no alternatives that you could use. And then that's where it all starts. And the reason why I have these bullet points here is to remind you that there's a lot of steps that you should take before jumping headfirst into actually writing the code. First and foremost, you want to verify that the contribution would actually be feasible, meaning that with the assumption of you having done the actual work, would all the other pieces fall into place for that actual work to end up in the code base, as in accepted. And this will always seem obvious to you because you see the value potential of your contribution to yourself. But then you will learn, if you go down this path, that sometimes people disagree. Sometimes people say, oh, that's a great feature, but we want to keep that out of this particular library or framework just because we decided that way on some conceptual ground. So the little checklist to do, you have to make sure that you can compile the project. If it doesn't even compile, then you have a problem because you have to fix that first before you can even start working on the actual contribution. You have to be able to run the tests if there's any, because the tests will verify that everything still works after the change that you made. And so if the tests are not passing even with the baseline branch that they use for the releases, then first you have to figure out why that is. Then you need to understand the code a little bit, just to make sure that your contribution is actually what you think it is. And then find a place for your change, and then take a look around in the repository to see if you spot any sort of red flags regarding the maintainers, as in, based on your personal communication preferences, you may not like the way things are being done on the project, and you may want to just opt out of working with the maintainers. In this sense, before you start a contribution, it's the equivalent of you joining up into a team where you and the maintainers are the team. So you kind of have to scope it out to see if it's going to be a good team or one that you actually don't want to be a part of. And then after all this, I advise you to get confirmation from the maintainers if your feature is actually welcome, because there's nothing or few things worse than putting in all the work to a specific feature only to then be told that the project doesn't want this and it will never get merged. Then you fork the upstream repository, and you kind of get into the more mechanical parts where you just make the changes. You call out that you made a pull request, and then go through the process of it being reviewed. So that's kind of end-to-end the life cycle of a pull request before it finally gets approved and merged and everyone's happy. And here are a little list of traits that show you how you can maximize the probability of everything going smoothly. And I'll call it out again. If it was pre-approved by the maintainers, if the change is significant, that is great, because you won't get hit with we don't actually need this label, and you won't waste time and energy. If they have contributor guidelines, which they almost always do, then make sure to follow that. It's obvious, but people forget. Try to write clear but short commit messages, and make sure that if there's any formatting requirements, that you abide by those. And then make sure not to make breaking changes unless that was also very explicitly approved by the maintainers, but it most likely won't be. Make sure to have tests, documentation, even if there wasn't any before. And then a few tips on how to be better in contributing, as in more efficient. One way, and this is something that I exercise pretty much every day: read large amounts of code, specifically the projects that you're interested in or projects that you consider high quality. Even if you don't want to contribute to it, sometimes you can learn a lot from reading the code of a project that has really talented and skilled and experienced people working on it. And then you should try to avoid rabbit holes, because dealing with understanding, trying to compile open source software can be a huge time waster if you let it become one. So I also advise to always time box everything. Don't give up immediately, but give it an honest try quickly, and then reach out for help in the appropriate channels. Whatever those are is always project specific. And then regarding reading the code, you don't want to read, most of the time, you don't want to read it like a novel. It's just top to bottom, unless it's pretty short. If it's longer, if it's thousands or millions of lines of code, then you will have to jump around based on the context of the specific code parts that you're reading. And that's okay. You can also avoid rabbit holes with proactivity. I've said this before in one of the previous slides, but I want to underline it again, that if you start working on something, make sure that the maintainers are aware. This is also good, because if the maintainers are not actually looking at the project, then you will realize that they're not responding, and that even if you do finish your change and it's the perfect change that the maintainers would actually love to have, if they will remain unresponsive and unaware of your change, then it will never get merged. And then again, reiterating, you should check if it compiles first, because if it doesn't, then you're just wasting your time, most likely. But the other thing to underline here is that depending on the number of alternatives, you might actually have to just go down the rabbit hole and even fix compiler errors yourself, because there could be hundreds or thousands of different libraries for certain use cases, and it could be that for some things there's only one. A good example of that is the Linux kernel. If that's where you need to make your change, it's not likely that you'll just be able to swap it out with something else. And now on to becoming a maintainer, which is one level up, if you will, from the contributor, as I mentioned above or before. A maintainer is like a contributor, but with additional responsibilities and with a sort of ownership stake in the project. And more importantly, the maintainer's activity or liveness equates to the project's activity / liveness, meaning that if a project has 5 active maintainers, that's great because then the project itself is alive. But if that number goes to 0 because all the maintainers have left, found something else that interests them to do, then the project is at best dormant. At worst, it's basically just dead because it's not receiving security patches. There's no one to approve the pull requests, etc. And running your own project, as in being a maintainer, it can be a very rewarding experience. I say that from my own personal adventures, but it definitely will be challenging as well because you kind of have to learn a lot on the go. And I'm not trying to discourage everyone. I'm just saying, be ready for that. And especially regarding communication. And so before you start your project, I would recommend thinking about the definition of success. Why are you doing this? What can you get out of it? How do you measure if you got what you wanted? And I don't recommend looking at the stars on GitHub or the likes. I don't recommend counting your commits as being something that is something to show off, because all those metrics can be sort of spoofed in a way that you can make one change into 100 smaller changes, and then you can say, oh, look how many commits I have. It's a great project on account of that, right? Well, no, not really. So try not to focus on those metrics. Instead, what you want is high quality code, high quality commits, and that will increase your personal brand recognition among your peers. And it will definitely attract more people who want to help out with it. And then all these other numbers that you may want to think about as good metrics, they will just automatically increase if you do it right. And then the other thing that you need is a product mindset. Treat the software that you're developing as a product, because it kind of is. It just happens to be free. But other than that, it is very similar. And the good thing about it is that the target audience is people like yourself, because whoever uses your software will likely be in a similar field, in a similar situation, in a similar use case as yourself. And just once again, you want to go for quality, not quantity, because of the product mindset. So don't try to implement 100 features, but then not have any test coverage for it. Implement just 2 features, but make sure that those are well-rounded. And then think about the first-time contributor experience. If you're a maintainer, think about that experience of people coming in and seeing your project, your README for the first time. It's pretty much like a product landing page when they see your repository, when they try to figure out what this software does, how does it work, how difficult it would be for them to use it. And then based on how well you check those boxes, people will consider contributing to your project. And that's actually the greatest reward, when you have a project that you maintain and other people just come in from the street and say, hey, I want to help you do this. And then allow yourself to be vulnerable. This goes back to the etiquette. Being able to receive criticism is important, but it's not always going to be constructive either. And definitely admit when you made a mistake and never take it personally. For me, the most important one is to admit your mistakes. I always consciously try to make sure that I'm not just in a discussion for the sake of proving myself right, even when I realize that I was actually wrong. If you start to realize that someone was actually right and you were wrong, it's best to just apologize immediately and then explain why you thought that you were right. And then be responsible. This goes back to the active maintainers. Basically, starting a project is like adopting a pet in the sense that once you start it and people start using it, you have to keep it alive if you want to be nice to society and your peers. You don't want to ever just up and abandon the project. You want to make sure that whoever uses it in the future can do so regardless of what happens. So that's why it was a good idea to have multiple maintainers. You don't want to be a one-legged chair. And basically, you have to make sure that if you end up quitting the project, you should at least try to give maintainer rights to one of the contributors who would like to volunteer. And then remember, the users are not paying you unless they are, which is also a thing that I've seen. There's a growing number of ways to accept donations and sponsorships for projects. But for the vast majority of the open source maintainers, this will not be the case. They will just do something fun in their free time for free. And then the reason why you have to keep this in mind is because you need to make sure that you don't take it too seriously. You don't burn yourself out stressing about some bug that people had just discovered and they say that it would be urgent for them to fix it. Always remember that if it's extremely urgent for someone to fix a bug, they can just fix it themselves as well. You're not owing them that fix on a schedule that they determine unless you're being paid. Of course, with that said, you can always try to be nice, and you should be, but make sure to keep this in mind. And then more of a conceptual, back to that marketing funnel idea that I was talking about regarding the product mindset earlier. The barrier to entry to contribute to your project should be like this. There should be a clear, visible, straightforward path with everything explained in it from start to finish so that people are more likely to actually go through with it. You don't want it to feel like this. And a lot of projects I've seen, they make this mistake that they don't document how the build system works. They don't document how contributions should work. And then people who end up contributing or end up creating a change or a pull request, a large percentage of them ends up abandoning it because of things that they just weren't aware of because it wasn't documented. Another good tip is to leverage plugin architectures. This will allow you to scale your community much faster and much easier. What I mean by this is that you can define interfaces in your code, and you can have these plugin points where customization of the behavior of the software can be augmented at runtime by passing in some different implementation of how something works. And a really good example of this is the Node.js library called Passport, which is for JSON Web Token Authorization. They have, I think, probably hundreds of plugins that the maintainers themselves don't need to maintain because it's all being written by other people who just wanted to use it. And if you compare the code base size of Passport itself versus the combined source code size of all the plugins, then you'll see that Passport itself is very small and simple and straightforward and therefore easier to maintain. And that's a great way to engage the community and make your project well known. And then back to the funnel again, back to how you can get people to contribute. Your quick start guide should be just a few lines of code that someone can execute in a terminal. And it should look something like this. This is obviously just a template. Depending on what your software is, this will look very different, but you get the point. It's just cloning the project and then getting into it, building it, starting it, and then it runs. If you have 15 steps to do, then there's probably something that you could optimize there. And a lot of times you can only converge to this because certain types of software will be much more complicated. Maybe it needs some networking infrastructure that has to be simulated, and so it won't be able to adhere to this convention of just having a few lines, but you should try to get as close to it as possible. And then testing the software. You should provide examples on how to use it. If there are APIs, a demo user interface can help a lot too, but that can be kind of a high touch element of it. So make sure that if you do add a demo UI, make sure that you can maintain that as well, because every line of code that you add in is something that now you're responsible for maintaining, and that can become a chore quickly, in the sense that if there's too much of it, you will start losing out on some of the basic maintainer tasks. And I will allude to this much more later, but you should always use automation as much as possible, because it will help you with your maintainer responsibilities being done more efficiently. And then the other obvious but actually surprisingly hard, is to be inclusive of all the operating systems, at least the major ones, not all of them, obviously. Windows, Mac, and Linux. And then the gold standard there is to have the CI also test all of those platforms. Again, this is probably not something that you can get done right off the bat when you're starting your project, but you should have an item for tracking this in the issue tracker at the very least. And then more automation tips. You can enforce certain formatting on the commit messages. You can enforce sign-offs. And this will help you later because, for example, if you write your commit messages in a certain format, you can use that to auto-generate release notes every time you issue a release. I use this on multiple projects that I maintain, and it has always worked great, because instead of me having to write some prose in English about what the new release actually contains, I just have a tool that generates an itemized list of the interesting changes that are new features, important bug fixes, performance improvements. And then once again, automation. This will be your best friend as a maintainer, because everything takes up time. And as the project grows, more contributors will come in, more pull requests for you to review, a higher velocity of changes. And so this bleeds into, all of these bleed into the time that you need to spend on the project, and it's growing exponentially. So you do have to make sure to have all the items here in some shape or form. I'm not going to read out loud the whole thing, but these are the ones that are on the short list. And then the other thing is, you want to make sure that there's diversity, stability, and inclusion on the project. Treat everyone with respect, regardless of their background or biological attributes. This will help you get more contributors as well. If everyone feels respected, they will be more likely to come back and help you with your project. And to get into the details of how you do that is you avoid prioritizing pull requests, for example, based on who opened them. An even more specific example of this is that a friend of yours opened a pull request just yesterday, and there's 5 other pull requests that were opened a month ago that you should go and review, but you actually just end up looking at your friend's pull request because that's your friend's pull request. So obviously it's up to you if you want to do that, but I just don't recommend it because people see that happen and it doesn't feel good, because it should be a first come, first served basis so that the merge conflicts that happen are minimized for everybody, not just your friend. And then you also have to make sure that you don't say yes to every feature without checking if it aligns with the project scope longer term. And that was it. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, then I'll be more than happy to try and answer them.
Thank you so much, Peter, for giving this amazing talk on open source software, especially when it comes to best practices when it comes to contributing it and to maintain it. I see that some of you have already inputted your questions in the Q&A section. Feel free to keep adding these questions in the meantime, and we'll try our best to get to as many of them as possible. So the first question is actually from Kevin. He asked, what are some tips to maintain code consistency when you are not familiar with the current code? I'd like to contribute, but I don't know how to use some libraries.
Okay, great question. I would encourage Kevin to interact with the maintainers on that. For example, instead of making a change all in one, you could write just a small snippet of what you are about to do in whatever way that feels right to you personally. And you could already ask them to review that as a draft. And if they see that you're using something not the way they like it, not even necessarily incorrectly, just in a way that they don't like it, then they will let you know. And then you can get ahead of this problem of you writing it in a way that, in a style that they don't like, and then you will have to rework the whole thing. And of course, you will need to find a project for this that has active and responsive maintainers who actually get back to you. So this is also a good way to test out the vultures in advance about how engaging the maintainers are in the project.
Thank you. Someone asked anonymously, what's the most common problem you face as a maintainer that you wish contributors would be mindful of?
The most common one is, I wish they would read the contribution guidelines, because we have, on the projects where I am a maintainer, we always have a lengthy document explaining the do's, the don'ts. But I can always tell when someone haven't read it, because they end up doing things or asking for things that we specifically call out as something that's a no-no. So that happens quite often.
Thank you. Another question from Maya. What are some good places to find open source software projects that need people?
I would recommend GitHub for that. They have an Explorer feature where you can specifically search for projects that actively try and get more contributors. And then there's events such as Hacktoberfest, which is a once a year event where all the maintainers of all the participating open source projects, which is in the many thousands as far as I know, they apply specific labels to specific issues. And based on that, you can find these issues, contribute, and have a pretty good chance of actually have it being accepted because the maintainers just recently said that they need this.
Thank you. And because of time, we're just going to take 2 more questions and then we'll officially wrap up the event. And the next question is from Sadie. How do you recommend contributors handle getting stuck? When is it too late to try to contribute? Backstory from Sadie is that she's gotten stuck multiple times while trying to contribute and then put off pushing the code for months.
That's a simple one. You have to ask for help. If the maintainers are willing to help, they will engage with you and they will push you over that position of you being stuck. And if they don't, if they're not willing to spend time on it or they're just not responsive at all, then you kind of just have to call it a day in the sense that if you're really stuck and there's no one to help you, then your time is better spent elsewhere. And then the other thing is you can always circle back. Sometimes I work on certain things for a week and then I put it off for a month because I need to think about how to solve that problem.
Thank you. And the last question is from Reed. As someone who is still learning to code, what are some contributions I could potentially make with a lower skill set that may help me stand out in a job search down the road? I know there's probably no easy answer to this, but any advice would be appreciated.
There actually is an easy answer to that. You can test the software. So you don't have to write a single line of code to be very useful to the project. You can test it. You can read the documentation, fix typos in it, fix mistakes in the documentation. You can actually test the documentation itself. If there's a how-to guide on using the software and you run through the steps and it doesn't work, and you report that to the maintainers by opening an issue in the tracker, that is also a contribution in my book and also in GitHub's book, because on your GitHub profile, it will still show that you've contributed to the project on that specific day. So I would say that still helps you stand out in the job search down the road.
So, all right, thanks everyone for all of your questions. And thank you so much, Peter, for taking the time to give a talk today and for answering everyone's questions. And before we wrap up, if we didn't get to any of your answers or you still have questions for Peter, you can always connect with Peter after the end of this event. So I guess on that note, Peter, what would be the best way for our audience to connect with you afterwards?
You can find me on Discord, LinkedIn. Those are probably the best ones. I think I gave those handles to the organizers. So it should be on my profile.
It will also, so these profiles that Peter mentioned will be on our landing page, and Stella will also be posting a chat message in the Zoom room. So feel free to look there too. And before we go, Peter, do you have any final thoughts or encouragements that you wanted to share with everyone?
Just, be resilient, don't give up, and be nice and polite to people on the internet. And thanks for listening.
Awesome. That's really great advice. Thanks again, Peter. And this is officially the end of this session. And a quick reminder that we do have a sweat giveaway going on right now. So don't forget to use the hashtag DGS2022 in your social media posts to increase your chances to win these awesome swags. It will be kind of a limited edition t-shirts along with anything else. You can post, for example, learnings you learned from today or any thoughts you have about the conference. And if you would like to become a speaker at our Codementor events, you can always check out Codementor Events homepage. The link will be provided in the chat. And upcoming, our next event for Developer Growth Summit is Node.js Virtual Machine, developing an external plugin system within your web app with Douglas Cooper. It will happen at 6 p.m. Pacific time, which is around 4 hours from now. And I hope to see everyone there. And remember, the link to the Zoom webinar will be the same as this one. So if you plan on joining us, please just use the same link. And the webinar for this event will be open for another 5 minutes in case you want to jot down anything from the chat messages or ask us any questions that you want. But after that, we'll close up for setup until the next event. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Have a great rest of your day.